Welcome to the Library of Congress's Madison building for this Author Salon event hosted by the Kluge Center. I'm John Haskell, the director of the Kluge Center. The Kluge Center was chartered 20 years ago here at the Library of Congress with a mission to bridge the divide between scholarship and policymaking. On a day-to-day basis, we support scholars and residents doing innovative and specialized work, and we project scholarship to a broader audience in events just like this. Today is our first Author Salon of 2020. Our effort here is to bring to your attention cutting-edge scholarship by our current NASA chair in astrobiology, exploration, and scientific innovation, Susan Schneider, who's at your right on the stage. Susan worked on her book when she was here as a distinguished visiting scholar back in 2018. Susan will be interviewed by Becky Brasington-Clark, right here directly to my left, Director of Publishing here at the library. Our next Author Salon event, we have material on this up front, is on February 19th with another scholar who worked on a book at Kluge, Ivan Krastev, who was Kissinger Chair in International Relations from 2018 into 2019, and he will be here to talk about The Light That Failed, a book that just came out in the US, a look at how and why Western ideals have lost their purchase in Eastern Europe since the opening of the Iron Curtain. Before we get to the conversation between Becky and Susan, let me tell you about an initiative that is new here at the library. Many of you know about the National Book Festival, which happens on a single day on Labor Day weekend every year. Well, beginning last fall, our new initiative was the National Book Festival Presents, NBF Presents, a year-long event with regular evening events here at the library and the Coolidge Auditorium in the Jefferson Building. Last fall, this new program kicked off with theologian Karen Armstrong, entertainer and children's author Neil Patrick Harris, and Andre Aciman. The upcoming ones here this year, the next one is April 6th. The first one of the year is February 6th, with novelist Alice McDermott. The ambassador from Ireland will introduce the event. Margaret Brennan from CBS News will be there, and another part of that event is Mary Gay Scanlon, a congresswoman from Pennsylvania. On February 13, the second NBF Presents of the year will feature Douglas Brinkley and Jean Theo Harris speaking to the legacy of Rosa Parks with NPR's Michelle Martin. Later in the winter, Margaret Atwood and Ann Talese and Jeffrey Rosen will be featured in NBF Presents. I hope you'll visit the website of the Library of Congress to find more details for those events, all in the Coolidge Auditorium. I'm now going to turn it over to Becky Clark to begin the conversation. Thanks, Becky.
Thank you, John. Welcome to the Library of Congress. Before we start what is certain to be a really engaging conversation, I want to remind you of the sequence of today's events. Dr. Schneider and I are going to talk on stage for about 45 minutes. Then we'll open it to questions for about 15 minutes. And then promptly at 5, we'll go to a book signing and reception. The book signing will be here at this table. If you need to get a copy of the book, we've got them for sale at the table a little bit closer to the door. So stick around. You're going to have a great time. Our guest today is Dr. Susan Schneider, and we're going to discuss her latest book, Artificial You, AI and the Future of Your Mind. Dr. Schneider's work examines the rapid developments in artificial intelligence and explores the implications for human intelligence. Forbes calls this book one of the best brain books of 2019, and other reviewers have reviewed it and characterized it as provocative, refreshingly candid, profound, thoughtful, entertaining, and fun. Susan, welcome. You've done a wonderful job here of considering both sides of the artificial intelligence coin. AI is already making life more convenient, and you outline a number of benefits that can make humans smarter, cure illness, and even extend life. Yet in the same pages, you caution us about what could happen if things go wrong. AI could outpace human intelligence, reshape human brains, even create machine minds that could reprogram themselves. So, I don't know, all of this sounds pretty futuristic to me. Why should we be concerned now about the future of AI?
Well, these technological innovations happen so quickly, and as a philosopher, I think we need to think hard about the future of humanity and where we see ourselves in the future. So AI is a tool, and what we need is beneficial AI that can allow for human flourishing. So I wrote the book in an accessible way so that I could encourage public dialogue on these issues and clarify what's at stake philosophically as well as scientifically.
So speaking of philosophy, this is really a field of study we usually associate with the human condition. Why should philosophy be concerned about artificial intelligence?
Good question. So as a philosopher, I work on the nature of the mind and self, as well as issues involving the fundamental nature of reality. So as I started to come to grips with the innovations in artificial intelligence, I realized that people were throwing around the idea that sophisticated machines not only would one day be created, but they would be individuals, they would be selves with minds, and that it would feel like something to be an AI. And furthermore, that we should merge with AI, that we could say, become cyborgs. And I thought, well, wait a second, let's think about the underlying philosophical issues here and understand what we're talking about. Before tech gurus present humanity's future, we need to think, first off, is it even possible? And also, what should we value? We shouldn't just do something because there's financial gain associated with it. It's good for AI companies. These are really philosophical questions about the future of the self and mind.
So you open the book with a fictional scenario set in the year 2045. There's a place called the Center for Mind Design where people like you and me can shop for a variety of brain enhancements. That would work by implanting microchips into the brain. I could choose from enhancements that could give me the ability to know what anybody in this room is thinking, or could make me a math whiz, maybe even find my car keys in the morning. So some of these improvements sound pretty appealing to an aging baby boomer like me. Is this type of enhancement likely to be any more problematic from a philosophical standpoint than a tummy tuck?
Yes. So let's assume, for the sake of discussion, that these enhancements are medically safe. Okay? The second part of the book urges that if you were to go to a Center for Mind Design and, say, buy a variety of brain chips, say you bought Zen Gardens, so you would have the meditative states of a Zen master, and another chip called Human Calculates. You could become like a Kurt Gödel of mathematics and logic, okay? If you did too much of this, at some point, who's walking out of that Mind Design Center? How do you know it's still you? Or could it be possible that when you walked into the Mind Design Center, you paid money to end your existence? So to decide what you should do and what changes involving your cognitive capacities are compatible with you continuing to be you, you have to reflect on age-old philosophical issues about the nature of the self. And that's where I get into the metaphysics, issues involving the nature of persons, because there's a lot of rich philosophical thinking on this issue.
So you talk about the ethical quandaries and potential ramifications of conscious AI, conscious artificial intelligence. What would it mean for an AI to become conscious?
That's a great question. The first half of the book is on the topic of conscious AI. And I think the most important thing to think about is what consciousness is, because it's one of the most fundamentally mysterious things about the nature of reality. So when you see the rich hues of a sunset, stub your toe and feel pain, smell the aroma of your coffee, you are having conscious experience. Every moment of your waking life, you're a conscious being. And even when you're dreaming, it feels like something from the inside to be you. And it's personal to you. And even though we have a sense of what other people are experiencing, we can't directly jump into their heads and know what it's like to be them. Now, science does not fully understand why we're conscious. There's robust issues there that are currently being investigated in the neuroscience of consciousness. And I've been excited to be part of a lot of those conversations. So now to go to the machine consciousness question, now that we understand what consciousness is, a lot of people interested in robotics and a lot of fellow philosophers wonder if we might one day be able to create machines that are conscious. So, they're already very human-looking androids. Indeed, that android on the left is being created right now in Japan to take care of the elderly.
It's on the right. On the right of the screen, but the screen is on the left.
Correct. Yeah, the screen's on the left, the android's on the
So
right.
the female android,
Because it's always
Sorry.
a female, right? Taking care of
that actually on the right is the creator Hiroshi Ishiguro, who I've had the pleasure of being on panels with, and he actually also created a prototype of himself as well, and one of his daughter. Wow, his child. So anyway, I think what is inevitably going to happen is, as these androids are walking around Japan, they're being created there to take care of the elderly, people are going to inevitably suspect that they're conscious because they look incredibly human. So it's important to ask the question, could a machine be conscious?
So how could you, is there a test that you could come up with? How could you tell whether a machine is conscious, particularly as they evolve to seem to have feelings or
Yeah.
seem to be sad or I've seen some of these clips you sent me and, oh my goodness, they're scary. How do you know if it's actually feeling something or not?
Yeah, great question. Because I'm worried that humans are going to experience what I call the cute and fluffy fallacy, where anything that is cute or fluffy, they impart consciousness to. They immediately think it feels like something to be them. So I think it's important to have actual tests for consciousness, and that's tricky. But I have been working on those tests over at the Institute for Advanced Study, and I talk about them in the book. So one way I suspect we'll be able to have a better handle on whether machines can have inner experience is when we begin to develop what are called neural prosthetics. So that's already underway, actually. So people are working on brain chips to help with certain mental disorders. So for example, Ted Berger has an artificial hippocampus. It's already in human clinical trials right now. It's a chip. It's currently external, but the idea is to make it implantable, okay? So that area of the brain is actually not implicated in conscious experience, according to our best science. But as we begin to replace parts of the brain that do underlie conscious experience with chips, we will probably find out whether those chips are capable of supporting consciousness. So in other words, if you want to find out whether something like a silicon chip is the right stuff for consciousness, stick it in a human's head and see what happens, right? That's one way to test. And I'm not advocating running tests like this, like I'm a philosopher, I don't even have a lab. I think, though, that medical science will inevitably move in that direction to help individuals who have disorders. So that's one test. I call that the chip test. I laid that out a few years ago in a TED Talk. And then another test is one I developed with Edwin Turner over at Princeton. He's an astrophysicist who's responsible for a lot of the space images you see. A really brilliant man. And that one involves actually working with an AI that has the ability to speak and express itself in an intelligent way. So I don't think we have, highly intelligent AIs yet. But the idea is that a question and answer test can be given at the research and development stage to see if the AI actually has the experience of being conscious. And, there are certain things that we understand and are capable of explaining in virtue of the fact that we're conscious beings. And I want to see if that happens in the case of AI. but that's only one test, and I'm very humble about it because I don't think it's going to work in every case of AI. I mean, what if the AI is non-linguistic or simply not like us? But it's one way to kind of get a handle on it for certain kinds of AIs.
And so what if the AI is bright enough to reprogram itself or to program itself around the test questions you're asking it to trick you?
Becky, you're exactly right. So if the AI is highly sophisticated, you have to really watch out. That test, I think, is good in the early years of AI development. Like, suppose in the next 30 years we come up with something that, who cares if it looks human? It acts as if it's conscious, and we want to run tests. We do it at the R&D stage. And I say that because you have to make sure the AI doesn't have information about human consciousness when you try to probe it for conscious experience. So you have to be very careful when you run this test. I say the AI has to be what I call boxed in, borrowing an expression from AI security work. So the idea is that you can't feed in too much knowledge into the deep learning system. If it's a deep learning system, you have to be careful with your data. You have to know exactly what's going on. But you're right, if it's an ultra smart, maybe what we call a super intelligent AI, it could reprogram itself. It could fake you out. It could do all kinds of things. So that test can only be used in carefully circumscribed situations. Sorry about that.
So what I found really interesting about this book is that you're a philosopher. You're engaging with the positive potential of artificial intelligence, and at the same time, you're engaging with questions of limits, really existential questions of how far we should go as a species in letting this develop. I found that quandary really interesting. For example, you describe yourself as a transhumanist, which is a philosophy that is generally open to the idea that technology can be used to enhance human intelligence. But when we talked the other day, I said, so do you use Siri? No. Alexa? No. What's that over your laptop camera there? That's a piece of cardboard. So you clearly have some anxiety about this. Tell me a little bit more about what that all means.
Well, AI regulation is currently the Wild West, and I read a lot of cyberpunk science fiction, right? And, I'm worried that if we don't regulate artificial intelligence, it's just going to continue to, mess with our heads when it comes to, elections, or take our data and, sell it to whoever. We need to regulate it. And the reason that I don't want Alexa in my house right now is I don't want it listening to my conversations. And I'm pretty fed up as a consumer with these technologies, frankly. And it will be wonderful when there are better AI regulations. And, if we do this now, the future, not only the near future, but the far future will be a better place. I mean, what we want to do is avoid, becoming a science fiction dystopia or laying down the tendrils for technology that can be utilized for bad purposes in the context of a bad government. We want this to be a democracy.
So that's interesting. We talked a little bit the other day. You're talking to some congressional staffers about AI policy, and I'm wondering what role could policymakers play in helping us avoid some of these risks?
Yeah, well, there's some wonderful work going on by the Congress and Senate AI caucuses right now, and there's a lot of concern about privacy, the kind of concerns that a lot of us have already experienced. There's also issues with trust that you may be less familiar with, but which are extremely important. So the issues there involve how we can even tell what the computations are of these sophisticated AI systems. So there are these deep learning systems, they're data-driven. And even now, the World Go champion, it's a deep learning system. And even the designers of the system couldn't quite tell why the system did everything it did during some of the Go matches. And so there are issues there with understanding the computations of the AI, and that's called the black box problem. And so I think a lot of lawmakers are very concerned with how we can trust AI, and I'm sure the Defense Department's pretty worried about that too, and how we can make AI transparent to ordinary people so that when we use it, we know what it's doing.
Interesting. Chapter 8 I found to be one of the most confounding chapters in the book and upsetting. You talk about a young woman, 23-year-old budding neuroscientist named Kim Sozzi, who on the day she found out she was getting a great internship in neuroscience also found out that she had a brain tumor. She pursued conventional therapy, and when it failed, she and her boyfriend started to explore something called cryonics. Can you tell us a little bit about the story of Kim Sozzi, what she was looking for, what she hoped to achieve, and what actually happened?
Yeah, no, that was a really sad experience. A New York Times reporter was doing a story on it and called me up, and I remember I have a daughter who's 19, and I lost so much sleep after hearing this tale. So this girl basically died in Scottsdale, Arizona, just steps away from a facility that she had hired to freeze her brain. So her brain is now frozen. And the hope is that she could one day be revived by this technology. And this technology is quite fascinating. I mean, I have colleagues over at Oxford who are planning on using it. The idea is to freeze your brain, and then one day when the technology exists to fix what killed you and to thaw the brain properly and fix, all the issues that happened during the freezing, you would be revived. Okay, so what does that have to do with AI? Well, sadly, in the context of Kim Sozzi, there was a lot of damage to her brain that had occurred before it was frozen because she had a brain tumor. And so the hope was to upload her brain instead, to measure the precise configuration of her neural connections and anything that, this is a future technology, right? Anything that, cognitive science finds to be of relevance to understanding how thought is generated, and basically upload the information into a computer program and download that program into an AI and, an android, maybe that looks just like Kim. And the idea is that would be a way for Kim to survive. And that upset me because I don't think that that's a true means of survival. It may at best create a copy of Kim.
Because she wouldn't have consciousness.
Well, we don't know if machines can be conscious. That's one issue. But I also worry, and this goes back to the issues involving the nature of the self that I alluded to earlier, it's just not clear that the self could survive such a radical transition and still be Kim.
Right.
You see? How many of you think that you are either identical to your brain or your earthly existence depends upon having the brain you have? It's not unreasonable, right? We see disorders of the brain affect the way we think. Okay, Kim's brain would no longer exist. Instead, she would be basically a program run on a computer. So if you think you are your brain or your survival is intimately connected to your brain, if you do that, if you upload, you've paid money to be killed. Or in Kim's case, she's just undergoing her brain is undergoing a useless surgery, unless the idea is to somehow create a backup copy, if you will. But anyway, I think this is the realm of science fiction to begin with, right? And it bothers me when people like over at the Future of Humanity Institute at Oxford are seriously working on this kind of technology as a means of survival.
Well, it is upsetting, and you think about this company out in New Mexico where there are just these rooms full of brains. And I remember one anecdote in your book. Fast forwards 3 years after Kim's death, and her boyfriend was bringing belongings to this facility that she might hope to that he believed she would want to have should she be able to be regenerated. And I just found that really tragic.
It was, and he was so wonderful. He spoke with me on the phone and answered so many of my questions. And I want to just kind of introduce a little kind of dichotomy here. So we can contrast a strategy to come back to life through cryogenics alone, the freezing and revival technique, which is what Josh, that's the boyfriend, and Kim had hoped for and signed up for, with a more radical strategy of not trying to revive the biological brain, but bringing the person back through uploading their mind onto a computer program. And it's that strategy which I think is flawed as a means of survival. Maybe one day the cryonics technology will work. And I don't mean to be a skeptic about that, because that, I think, believe it or not, is more sensible, right? I mean, if you believe that the mind is closely connected to the brain, this is trying to revive Kim's brain. Uploading, I think, on the other hand, is far-fetched. And if you want to survive, I don't recommend radical uploading or even replacing various parts of the brain with chips, because you're taking tissue out, right? And this gets to the issue that I see in the news a lot, like people like Elon Musk are talking about humans merging with AI by becoming cyborgs. And they often think that we could remove parts of the brain and replace them with chips. And I think we need better strategies for human survival, because I think it's not unreasonable to think that the brain plays a key role in who we are. And until we can rule out that hypothesis, we need to be more skeptical.
It's interesting, though, because none other than Stephen Hawking
Yes.
suggested before he died, he said, I think the brain is like a program, so it's theoretically possible to copy the brain onto a computer and so provide a form of life after death. Now, do you think he was just sort of looking into the future or thinking hopefully, or you can't get into his brain either, but he was a pretty smart guy.
Yeah, it's a common position. I used to find it to be potentially true myself. I mean, I have an earlier book on the computational nature of the brain. And so if you come from cognitive science or physics, I mean, the leading paradigm right now in cognitive science about the nature of the brain is that it's computational, right? And there's a field, computational neuroscience, that studies that. So it's not silly to think that we could specify a computer program that kind of causally predicts thinking, one day in principle. So it can often lead people to the idea that the mind is a program and that we can therefore survive. Because once you think program, you think uploading and downloading is possible. And then you get into a sort of, atheist route to immortality, and that can get really exciting, right? Like Ray Kurzweil, Elon Musk. It looks really exciting. Right. I wish that we were programs and we could upload and download, whenever we wanted to survive. And, you could upload if you needed to go to Italy instead of catch a flight and just rent an android body in Florence.
But the food wouldn't taste the same, would it?
Well, if the sensors were good enough, the pasta in Italy would still taste fabulous,
and you
right?
would gain weight, right?
Hey, I never thought of that.
It's pretty good.
I know. So, the bummer is that in one of the later chapters of the book, I argue the mind is not a program.
Right.
I'm so sorry to tell you that.
I'm actually pretty relieved to hear that. But I want to speak very briefly about one of my favorite characters in science fiction. We talked a little bit about a mutual affection for Star Trek, and you have a theoretical exercise in the book about one of my favorite characters, Lieutenant Commander Data from Star Trek: The Next Generation, who is one of the most lovable androids out there. And so the exercise is if Data were facing annihilation, physical annihilation, could he, as an android, upload his android or his AI to a computer, download it into a different form in a different place, and achieve immortality? Can you talk a little bit about what you were thinking there?
Oh, yeah, and I just wrote an op-ed on this, too. All right, so this gets into the program issue. All right, so let me start by saying why the mind isn't a program, okay? An equation doesn't exist anywhere. An inscription of the equation does, okay? An equation is what philosophers call an abstract entity. It's not really in space-time at all. Similarly, a program isn't, it's not in space and time. It's an abstract thing, like an equation, okay? Now, if you think about for a moment what is a self or person, it's not like an equation or a program. We're concrete. You're here right now. You're in space-time. And you can cause things to happen. See, I just lifted my coffee cup. You see? Equations don't do that. Programs don't either. But the computer itself does. The computer can do things. It can execute programs. So what is Data really? Well, Data's an android. It's a computer execution of a program. And what is your brain, even on the assumption that the computational approach is right? You can describe it not as a program, the mind, that is, can't be describable as an abstract thing. At best, it's the thing running the program. You see? The execution of the program, the thing running it. Well, all right, what is that thing? That's a philosophical issue that people like Locke, Hume, Nietzsche, and others have thought about. That is, what is the nature of the self? You see? So to suggest the mind is a program is a Pandora's box. You're not an abstract thing. You may be the thing running the program, but that just raises the philosophical issue, what is a program? Well, I didn't really answer the question with respect to Data, right? I just answered it with respect to people. But basically, the upshot is the same issues arise for Data himself. He's not a program. An android is not a program. A program is an abstract thing, like an equation. Data is the implementation of the program. And so if he tries to upload, he too doesn't survive. So I think the matter that makes us up is important to our survival, whether we be androids or people.
So we're gonna. I want to ask one more question before we open the floor to questions, and that's talking about Ray Kurzweil, whom you know. He's a futurist and director of engineering at Google. He predicts that we're approaching a technological singularity, marked by runaway technological growth and massive changes to civilization. Do you agree with them? And if that's going to happen, what are the implications for life as we know it?
I think it's difficult to know if we're going to have a true technological singularity. A singularity in the technological sense is, as you say, this point at which there's, such tremendous change that we can't even follow the technological innovations. And for Kurzweil, the change happens in a bunch of scientific domains. It's facilitated by AI, but it happens in genetics and nanotechnology and whatnot. It may be that things don't take off the way he says, and it may be that his timeline is off. And in a way, I find that kind of futuristic speculations about when to kind of sidetrack people. But I think the ethical issues are there. And I do suspect that artificial intelligence will be capable one day of outthinking humans. I don't know if we'll be able to create conscious AI or if we'll care to do so. That's something I argue for in the book. But AI that's capable of outperforming us in the workplace, that's smarter than us, I do suspect that could happen. And if you ask me to put a time frame on it, you know, anywhere from like 50 to 100 years on the assumption that our science is still around.
Wow.
Could be.
It's a mind-blowing book. It just blew my mind several times over the course of reading it. So I want to go ahead and open the floor to questions because I know you have a lot. I just want to ask you, please, to keep your questions short and to the point, and to be considerate of our guest and your fellow audience members, not to use the opportunity to use the Q&A as a lecture forum. We've got a couple of folks roaming with mics, and we'll start with you and just wait for someone to come with the mic. Yeah.
Two quick questions. One is you began by talking about embedding chips in the brain. I think aren't we barely at the point where they understand they can put a probe in to stimulate a thought or a feeling? Are we anywhere near where the technology exists to interface a chip with the brain and have it doing anything useful? And the other question is regarding regulation. If we regulate AI in the United States, that will certainly not affect anything happening international. And so the question is, can any form of regulation really be practical in terms of controlling the direction that AI takes globally?
Okay, so the second question is, I mean, I think absolutely what we do here can be a model for other countries, but most importantly, it could help with this country, and other countries will have their own regulations, and hopefully we'll see international collaborations, and you know, there already have been such, so I think that is important. And to the earlier point, I mean, I did raise already the case of Theodore Berger's research on the artificial hippocampus that's already in clinical trials in humans with success. So what they did in that case is they took the algorithms that the hippocampus is a relatively well understood part of the brain. It's responsible for laying down new memories. The algorithms for each area of the hippocampus, and it's not to say that the chip that he's using at all is a complete model. I mean, it's a very partial model, but even a partial model, a chip was able to compute some of the functions that were needed to enable individuals with memory loss to lay down new memory. It's very exciting. And the hope is that, there's a lot of research right now. So like DARPA, for example, they're working on chips, and implants of, all sorts for illnesses like post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, and whatnot. So yeah, there's a lot of work on this. It's very exciting to the extent that it can help individuals with brain disorders.
Yes, up here in the front.
Thank you very much. I'm looking at AI in education in China, and I have a couple of questions for you. What do you think is the timeline for social robots that the child may perceive as having empathy, being able to interact with? When do you think they will come about and be used perhaps in education? What will happen to data collected from children who are being, in education, if that data is collected? What will that say about human beings and consciousness? And thirdly, what sort of regulation do you think we should be seeing in this field?
So I don't know a lot about the use of robots in children's lives, but I do know that the World Economic Forum has a committee on that. And if you want to reach out to me, I can put you in contact with the person who runs that committee. Yeah, okay.
Here in the front.
My understanding is that the brain and the body are connected, and so that there's hormones and other things that go on between the body and the brain. So the brain isn't just separate, and I haven't heard anything addressed about that, although I do believe that, I don't know scientifically, but I think there's a feedback loop of the body telling the brain things. And so if you don't have a body, how are you getting that whole picture the hormones, and all the signals that go up and down.
Right.
Yeah, that's a great point. And in the book, I make a note of that. And I think that is a challenge that people who believe that thinking is computational think is surmountable, because they think that their model of thought could just be extended to encompass parts of the nervous system that extend beyond the brain, and even gut bacteria perhaps. So I mean, that I don't think is a challenge to the idea that thinking is computational.
Okay, let me ask one more.
Yeah.
follow-on then. There's-
Can you wait for the mic?
Sure.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you.
I was just recently, a quick reference to Edgar Casey, but I thought.
Can you bring it just a little?
Quick reference to Edgar Casey and some of that, where there's this telepathic thing going on. Or sometimes you can have two people that are in sync so well they understand each other, or that I don't know the science of it, the brain waves, where there's actually a kind of a connection, or electrical connection perhaps, between people. So it's outside of the brain. There's an energy that comes from your thoughts and connects elsewhere. How is that modeled in this? I'm just looking for, how does this model hold up? It just, to me, the model of computational seems too simplistic, and I hark back to philosophy where Descartes, I think therefore I am, which was not the whole picture of what a person is, not just.
Well, okay, to the extent that we find some physical phenomena that surprises us, that's implicated in the causation of thought, the real issue here is whether we could encode that mathematically. To the extent we can, it's all compatible with some form of computationalism. Okay.
Right here?
Yes, I have a quick question. To sort of follow on her comment, I think that people are concerned that they will be displaced by AI, both in the workplace and in relations to other humans. So would you like to comment on relationships in both the workplace and outside of work?
Yeah, and in fact, I was going to talk a little bit about the film Her. Yeah, I wrote a little piece for the New York Times on this. I did. And so in this film, Theodore has a relationship with his digital assistant. Okay? And my husband's in medicine, and he's telling me that the Siris and Alexas of the future, like the technology, is getting more and more seamless, because he hears the people trying to sell him things. It could be that as these conversational assistants become more seamless and believable, people have relationships. And that's why I think it's so important to understand consciousness, because, let me ask you this, like when you're friends in a relationship and you don't like the spouse of the person, like, don't you think it's kind of a shame for your friend? Well, what if your friend's in a relationship with a non-conscious AI, right? Like, we should know whether it feels like anything to be the AI, right? So we got to watch for that cute and fluffy fallacy. And to the workforce issue, you raise a very important issue, and I think here in Washington in particular, there's a lot of concern for employment. Well, technological unemployment is a big thing. I mean, as AI grows more and more sophisticated, the unemployment, I suspect, if you ask me, will be very severe, the unemployment. And that's why Elon Musk and Ray Kurzweil and people like that think that the way that humans should go forward is to merge with AI, because then they compete with them in the workplace and can squash them should the AIs try to take control. So see, these issues, the here and now issues, can be used to motivate the idea that our children or grandchildren should one day go get chips in their head, you see. So as a philosopher, I want to straighten this out now. Okay?
Yeah, to be honest, there are only so many replacements. That's what I wanted to say.
You mean, what do you mean by that?
You can read into it as you wish.
Okay. Oh, okay.
So we've got a question in the back here.
Thank you. I was reading something not too long ago that made the assertion that the machines had gotten to the point where if, well, they had not crossed the line. If you have a baby who can sit up and sitting there on the floor and you drop a pin, that they will reach over and get the pin and hand it back to you. But if you threw the pin down, they wouldn't get it. And that the machine had not crossed that line yet between knowing that the person was upset and probably didn't want the pin back or just dropped it. And so I was just wondering, is that already old hat that the machines can do that easy? But just talk a little bit about the emotional side of life, and where are we in the emotional side of life in AI?
Oh boy, that is a good question.
It's a tough one.
I mean, it depends on the kind of AI system. So, you can get a deep learning system, which is data-driven. You can show it enough visual images, say it's a visual system, to where eventually it might be able to make some inference about that pin drop, right? But that's not the kind of causal reasoning you're talking about. You want to know if it has a sort of representation of what's going on in the mind of others, And there aren't AIs that are deeply sophisticated like that now, right? And so the question is, will there ever be as we move into the future? And my quick answer is, to the extent that cognitive science can deliver up algorithms that the human brain uses to do it, in principle, can't we just encode that into some future AI? Why not in principle, right? I'm not saying it'll happen in 30 years, but.
Another question there?
This is a relatively simple question. The caregiver robot that was on the screen here, I wondered about her facial expressions. Does she blink? Does she smile? Does she frown? Does she look confused? What is her face like?
Hiroshi Ishiguro's work is very nice. I mean, there are facial muscles, a lot of facial muscles. I don't know today's number, but last time I saw them, I think it was 120. And the idea is to actually simulate how the face moves. And you can Google Japanese androids, and it'll take you to his lab webpage, and you can see videos. So it's pretty interesting. I just personally find it creepy, I have to confess. I mean, I don't know why we want AIs to look like us. I don't get that. I mean, well, maybe I do, but yeah.
In the back there?
So you touched on the fact super AI, there's a risk that as it becomes more intelligent, it doesn't share the same value system as we do, and it starts causing harm to humans. What are the things that we could start thinking about now to try to address that before it gets there?
Oh, nice question. So there's a lot of work on this that's very interesting. So people like Nick Bostrom and, why am I blanking out? There's a new book, Human Compatible, by Stuart Russell. These are great books detailing these issues, and these issues are now world news because of Bostrom's book. And so people like Bill Gates, Stephen Hawking, a lot of individuals have been very, very concerned that if we were capable of creating a kind of general purpose, highly intelligent artificial intelligence, it would quickly outpace us intellectually. It would be called super intelligent artificial intelligence. And then there's what's called the control problem, the problem of how we would control it, because the worry is that it might inadvertently lead to our demise. And Bostrom's book in particular scared so many people. I mean, people were reading it at the manuscript level, like Elon Musk and others. And so there's been millions of dollars of research now on how to build safe artificial intelligence, and a lot of different strategies used that I can't really elaborate on right now, but they're elaborated on in those books.
Did we have a question right there?
Hi. So you seem to make a distinction between AIs and AIs having a conscience, like us. But do we really even have a conscience, or is it just something that we delude ourselves into thinking that we tell ourselves to kind of, and that's why we have dominion over the rest of the animals on the planet? Is there something like we just tell ourselves, like we tell ourselves that there's God and so forth?
I'm really glad you asked that, because the word consciousness and conscience, those words are different. They have different meanings, but they sound so alike that it leads to confusion. And usually, like when I give talks, I lay that out at the beginning, and I apologize for not putting that on the table. So let me just clarify. Consciousness is the felt quality of experience. It's what it feels like to be you from the inside. Jeffrey Dahmer had no conscience. He was a serial killer. Okay, but he had conscious experience. He probably had all kinds of experiences when he was dismembering people.
Oof.
Right? I mean, that's a colorful way of distinguishing consciousness from conscience. So not all conscious beings will have a conscience. Okay?
Got another one over here? Did I? In the back?
Thank you. I'm looking at the caregiver robot again, and wondering what you think of as the future for care, not just caregiving robots or AI in the United States, but also with helping folks with different mobility challenges or Alzheimer's, short of having to be interfacing via chip with any kind of AI. That future is now. I mean, they even have some personal mobility assistants on display at the auto show right now at the convention center that help people access and get into their vehicles. That so I'm just wondering how, short of something like a Saturday Night Live skit, which has been done about our elderly experiencing dementia, calling Alexa by any other name but Alexa, how that future and now really can look. Thank you.
Beautiful question. AI could be transformative in all sorts of medical contexts. I think the medical arena may in fact be the most important arena for AI. While I don't like the idea of human-looking androids, I love the idea of mobility assistance. I think it's incredibly important. I mean, imagine, being able to stay out of an elder care facility because you can stay in your home and not trouble your children or relatives, or hire a human to take care of you, who in contexts where you may feel uncomfortable being taken care of. So I think that's lovely. It gives people more options. Similarly, I mean, there are people who are locked in. And, there are projects, long-standing projects, involving brain chips to help locked-in individuals. I mean, this is all really exciting. Similarly, just in everyday healthcare, where doctors chronically forget all sorts of things and misdiagnose us constantly. I mean, if they have AIs, that are assisting them, it could minimize these kinds of horrible errors, right, which contribute to so many deaths. But the devil's in the details of AI regulation, because we're not going to want AI knowing our healthcare data if we don't trust that that data is going to be used the right way. It needs to be private. So this gets back to good regulation. So I think that's the window here. Similarly with autonomous vehicles, which could allow us to keep going places when we can no longer drive. We need autonomous vehicle regulations that are good.
A question here in the front.
You've talked a lot about computers and humanoids and humans. Science usually begins by screwing around with non-human animals. Have you seen any work being done on chipping animals?
Well, yeah. I mean, so to go back to Berger's artificial hippocampus, it was first the chimpocampus used in primates, right? I mean, yeah, the animal tests always come first, and I'm very worried about non-human animal liberation issues. Read a lot of Peter Singer, there's animats, creatures that are part biological and part AI. If you Google animats, you'll see various examples. There's a rat brain. There's a brain in a vat over at the University of Florida that is made of rat cortical tissue, and it flies flight simulators. The military was funding the project. It flies them quite well.
I think we had one more question back, and
always check your pilot in person.
I wanted to ask about Elon Musk. He's like the opposite of Sanders. It's not me, it's us. It's with him. It's not us. It's me. And
there you are.
So his company's value is almost all the data. The cars lose money. The solar city loses money. The only value it has is the data. So why do you trust him if you don't trust Alexa?
Because I have 2 Teslas. He knows his technology, man. No, I didn't say I agree with him. I argue against him in my book, though. I mean, I hope he doesn't shut my car off. But I argue against him. I don't think we can merge with AI.
He knows where every driver goes. He knows. He has all the data on all the places you stop. He has all that data.
Yeah, I don't think he's a bad guy. I think he's a good guy. But I mean, I think the point here is really deep because, when you have, all these AI companies with all this data and you have these AI powerhouses, the potential for disaster in principle, I mean, not to sound really scary, well, I always do, so what the heck. The potential, should there be, a bad individual that has access to all of his data is quite awful.
so with that, I just want to say that we have wine in the back. But I also want to give a warm round of applause to Susan Schneider. What an amazing conversation. You can get Susan's book here at the table. She's going to be signing right over there. If you need to just grab a bottle and
a bottle?
Bemoan. Yeah, no, just joking. But thank you so much for coming.